No narration. Music by Carl Cavad. This case takes place on the outskirts of London on the 22nd of May 2013. Lee Rigby was born in 1983, and when he was young his family moved to Middleton, a town on the outskirts of Manchester in the north of England. It was in Manchester that he enlisted in the British Army at the age of just 19. He was a drummer in the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and since joining he has served in many areas of the world. He was in Afghanistan twice, and also served in Cyprus, Jordan, Belize and Northern Ireland. Usually, Lee completed a tour of service abroad and then would return home and be based in Lancashire to continue his training. But in 2011 he qualified as a recruiting instructor for the British Army, a role that would see him based at the Army Depot in London. His family were incredibly proud of him, and he was described as a loving son and a brilliant soldier. When Lee was growing up, he would look up to his grandfather in awe and strive to emulate him in a number of ways. When Lee was younger, he would often sit and listen to tales from his grandfather with great interest, especially those relating to his military service. One particular story that stuck in the mind of Lee was when his grandfather was heavily involved in World War II. One day he was on a beach in Italy when a young girl no older than 10 years old came running from the house of a village which was on the front line of battle. An enemy shell had struck the girl's home, killing both of her parents, and she had been totally left alone in the rubble. Lee's grandfather took the young girl and brought her to safety. He became the girl's guardian for some time, and the two then lost contact. Many decades later, Lee became a father to his own boy named Jack. Lee loved being a father, and he would always put his son before anything else. But unfortunately, Lee was killed when his son was only just 2. Lee also had a fiancée named Rebecca. The two had been together for 8 months before Lee was killed. The couple were very happy, and according to Rebecca, they were getting along very well. Before Lee was killed, he had been making plans with the couple's future together, and was looking for a house where they would live. But Lee also had another love besides his family. He loved football, so much in fact that he was the Manchester United mascot. So on the 22nd of May 2013, Lee had just completed a training session on armed public order training on the outskirts of London in the district of Woolwich. As he was leaving, he swapped his woolen hat to a baseball cap and was heading to catch a bus to Camberwell. Lee was wearing his civilian clothes, but with a Help for Heroes charity hoodie. Once reaching the bus stop in Woolwich, Lee spotted another soldier and the two chatted. But as they were, Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale in a speeding car struck Lee hard from behind and knocked him out of his shoes and into the middle of the road. As Lee lay in the road, the two men emerged from the car and began to stare at Lee as he lay there. One witness would later say that the men looked like cannibals ready to eat their prey, and with a large knife and a cleaver they set upon Lee. The men began to hack at his neck and torso with such brutal force that they nearly beheaded him. Lee suffered 46 stab wounds and was hacked with such force that his body was left in the middle of the road. The sounds of the attack were described by one witness as like an axe chopping wood. In just a few short minutes, Lee's body was almost decapitated, and as this was happening, the two attackers dragged his body into the middle of the road, right in front of oncoming traffic. Several witnesses who were driving or on buses saw the carnage in the road and got off to offer whatever they could do to help. Several people bravely tried to tend to Lee, but to be honest, there was nothing anyone could do. But that didn't stop people from trying. Even a local cafe owner came running out with towels to try and slow the extreme blood loss. At this point, several people had gathered near Lee's body, trying to offer assistance. This was when one of the most heroic acts occurred. A woman by the name of Ingrid Loyal-Kennett jumped off the bus and ran towards the two killers. She didn't run the other way like most people would. Ingrid said she saw people at the scene and thought she could help. Ingrid was a Cuban-born woman working as a translator at the time of Lee's killing. On this day, she had just finished a job for the Home Office. As she was on the bus driving past the scene where Lee lay, she saw people gathered around. At first, she thought it was an accident, so she stayed on the bus. But then she saw the weapons. Without hesitation, Ingrid left the safety of the bus and ran towards the attackers. She said she felt a sense of duty to take action, as the people who had gathered at the scene appeared not to know what to do. Here is what she said in an interview. "Everyone was so scared, I didn't realise how scared people were. When I got out of the bus, no one had a mobile phone, no one was doing anything. She ran to the side of 29-year-old Michael Adebolajo, who was wielding a cleaver covered in blood. She said, "Come on, let's get out of here. What would you like me to say to them? Do you want me to tell them to come and play football with you?" I tried to grab his hand. I couldn't. He was too strong. I couldn't even grab the bag. He was swinging the bag, which was on the side of the neck of the poor man. I tried my best. Someone else who was at the scene later said, "I was standing about 3 feet away from the attacker. There was another woman who was talking to the other man, who I understand now to be a convert. She was asking him why he had done what he had done. I don't even know if she was trying to be heroic or just stupid. Anyway, she was talking to the other man, and I thought to myself, there's only one man going for my neck." Lee didn't die immediately, and witnesses would later report that after he was attacked, he was seen moving. One person said that he was definitely moving and trying to get up. A number of the people who had gathered at the scene attempted to give first aid to Lee, but then one of the killers, the one who was now holding a gun in his hand, told the people who were trying to help that they should stay back. The man was saying, "Let him die." The two men then mockingly encouraged bystanders to call the police. A Metropolitan College student was on the bus next to where Lee's body lay. She got out and tried to help, but the attacker with the gun told her to stay back. She later said, "I couldn't do anything for him, which makes me really sad. I just feel so sorry for him and his family and friends." Several people at the scene thought the men had killed Lee and were now about to shoot him. Those who were at the scene were so afraid of the men with weapons that they poured into the cafeteria at a nearby hotel, and bystanders sought safety in a nearby building. Despite the danger, Ingrid went right to the men and tried her best to distract them and tend to Lee at the same time. Amazingly, Ingrid managed to take numerous items from the men, including a gun, a revolver, and a knife. Despite the danger, Ingrid managed to take some items from the men, including a weapon. Several other people, including an ex-soldier, ran towards the scene of the crime, where Ingrid was confronting the two killers. The ex-soldier said, "I jumped off one bus, crossed the road, and there was a lady from the bus stop who put down her bag to help. I was about to join in when 2 other ladies came. We would have been surrounded, and they had weapons, so I hung back. That's all there was to it." 7 minutes passed from when Lee was attacked until the armed response unit arrived. According to witnesses, the two men then approached the police with weapons in hand. As the armed police vehicle approached, one of the men ran towards the car, while the other remained in place. Both men were shot multiple times at close range by armed officers. When the armed response unit arrived, they scanned the area to ensure there were no other threats before removing Lee's body and closing the street. Both of the killers were taken to hospital with horrific wounds. Michael Adebolajo had 2 badly broken arms and sustained bullet wounds to his hand. Michael Adebowale had a number of bullet wounds to his chest and hands, and a part of one of his fingers had been severed. The attacks that had taken place that midday in Woolwich stunned the United Kingdom, but luckily both of the killers would survive their wounds. A manhunt was soon underway to find out if anyone else was responsible for the attack, but soon it became clear that it was these 2 men acting alone. In the hours following the attack, people began to speculate as to what the motivations behind the killings were, but soon the truth came out. Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale had killed Lee for a very eerie and twisted reason. They claimed they had killed Lee on the streets for revenge for the killings of Muslims by the British Army in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as the killers lay in hospital beds, the police and security services began to piece together just who these men were and how they had come to be radicalized to the point of committing such a twisted crime. Michael Adebolajo was the older of the 2 killers. He was 29 at the time of the murder. He was born in London to parents who hailed from Nigeria. It is reported that both of his parents are devout Christians. Reports state that they had both been ordained as pastors in their Nigerian denomination in London. Michael was the eldest of 4 sons in a close-knit Christian family and was brought up in a loving home. But according to his friends, it was in secondary school where Michael started to change. He abandoned his former Christian beliefs and increasingly identified himself as a Muslim. But not just any kind of Muslim. As those who knew him would later explain, he started to take on a more radical form of Islam. At the age of 15, during a school lesson, he confronted a teacher. Michael claimed the teacher had insulted the Prophet Muhammad, which led to a physical altercation. He was expelled from school, and following this incident, he converted to Islam at age 16. Friends later said Michael became absorbed in extremist Islamic lectures and began viewing them as spiritual leaders. Despite having limited knowledge of Islam and only a few years as a Muslim, he was attending events by known extremists such as Anjem Choudary, all in secret from his parents. At age 19, he legally changed his name to include Muhammad. After leaving high school, he enrolled to study Islam and Arabic at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where he met Michael Adebowale in 2008. Meanwhile, Michael Adebowale was the younger of the two murderers. He was born in May 1992 in the London district of Greenwich. He was raised as one of 6 children by his mother and reported difficulties with his upbringing. He suffered from mental health problems in his younger years. At age 10, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act and sent to a hospital in Worcestershire due to experiencing auditory hallucinations. At age 12, he converted to Islam in secret. Like the other killer, he began attending events organised by extremist groups and listening to extremist preachers. As Michael got older, he became associated with street gangs and participated in gang-related violence. He also began relationships with much older women. His friends would later say these women took advantage of him. It is believed by some that he would do almost anything for their approval. At age 16, he too sought out extremist groups. According to some sources, he sought out the putative spiritual guidance of Anwar al-Awlaki, an extremist Islamic cleric who at one point led AQAP and was killed in a drone strike. It was through these extremist groups and ideologies that the two teenagers met and formed their friendship. During the 2012 Olympics, Michael Adebowale was sectioned again under the Mental Health Act. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia after claiming the security services were spying on him and had implanted a chip in his brain. In the years preceding the killing, both men had been under investigation by security services. Michael Adebolajo was monitored by MI5 from 2008 to 2012, and they even attempted to recruit him to spy on extremist groups. A friend later confirmed that Michael had collaborated with MI5 in 2011 and 2012. It is believed that Michael travelled to Kenya in 2010 to meet with Anjem Chowdary's associates in East Africa, but was captured by Kenyan anti-terror police. He later claimed this experience greatly angered him, which he said was a catalyst for what happened to Lee. According to his account, the detention was brutal and led to his release after 3 weeks through British government intervention. Upon his return to Britain, MI5 requested an interview, which he declined. MI5 believed Michael was a low-level threat rather than a high-ranking one. They monitored him until March 2012 and then ceased surveillance due to lack of resources. Almost a year later, Michael Adebowale was also monitored, and the two men had already started to plan their gruesome crime. On the day of the killing, Michael Adebolajo approached Lee and made inflammatory statements about the government's military actions. The two then discussed how they would carry out the attack. Michael believed that by killing Lee, he would be seen as a martyr and hero within extremist circles. The two men even set up an email account in the weeks before Lee's killing and sent messages to each other. Then, on the day of the murder, Michael Adebolajo bought a set of 5 top-up vouchers for pay-as-you-go SIM cards. People who knew Michael believe his actions were driven by extremist propaganda and a desire for recognition within these organisations. Some noted that his experience with MI5 affected his worldview. According to his friends, since returning from Kenya, Michael spent considerable time watching extremist videos. One friend said these obsessions appeared to have significantly affected his mental state. On the day of the murder, as the two men drove together, they exchanged messages with extremist rhetoric and planning. On the morning of the murder, Michael Adebolajo had made statements to others about his extremist views, blaming Western foreign policy and suggesting soldiers should be targeted. In the days before the killing, he made violent threats and expressed extremist rhetoric about attacking government and Western targets. The murder had its desired result, as the killing dominated news coverage for weeks and was later cited by extremist groups. The trial of the two men started on 29th of November 2013. The prosecution had no difficulty proving who had killed Lee, with countless witness statements and CCTV footage available. Both men openly discussed the killing and their motivations. Since they had already confessed, the trial did not require extensive evidence presentation. However, the two men differed in their defence strategy. Michael Adebolajo pleaded not guilty, claiming he was a soldier acting in response to government military actions. Michael Adebowale took a different approach. There was a great deal of evidence showing both men to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, so their only hope was to have a sentence less than life in prison. In the case of Michael Adebolajo, his defence argued that he could not be found guilty of murder because at the time of the killing he had abandoned his duty to adhere to the law of the land by adopting the ideology of extremist groups. This was essentially the basis of his defence. Michael Adebolajo was found guilty of the murder of Lee and was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. In the case of Michael Adebowale, his defence argued that his paranoid schizophrenia affected his culpability and mental functioning at the time of the crime. He was found guilty of the murder of Lee and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 45 years. It also turned out that MI5 had known about Michael Adebowale for some time prior to the killing, but did not detain him or inform police of the threat. However, it is argued that there was insufficient intelligence at that time to warrant detention. It emerged that a French intern named Raffle stumbled upon extremist website content while browsing the internet. The site contained threatening messages and extremist imagery and propaganda. Raffle explored the website further out of curiosity, navigating to pages related to extremist ideology. He encountered a page requesting personal information, which he filled out with false details out of curiosity about where the site would lead. After submitting the form, he received a response email from Michael Adebolajo within hours. Raphael replied, "Hello, I'm from up north. None of my friends and family will have anything to do with me because of my Hanif Muslim faith. I am keen to help." Raffle admitted he was just joking around with someone he thought was an extremist, and assumed that it would be relatively harmless as they were separated by international borders. Despite this being the case, the email exchange continued. Michael at one point writes, "Brother, tell me about yourself. Are you an Arab?" Raffle replied with vague responses, continuing the exchanges. They also exchanged links to videos, and each watched the videos the other had sent. One of the videos that Michael sent was a clip of a beheading of a US soldier, and according to Raffle, Michael seemed fascinated by the disturbing content. Many of the emails exchanged were about fighting and dying for Allah. The email exchanges continued with discussions about fighting and dying for their cause. On the 19th of May, 3 days before the murder, Michael sent a threatening email to Raffle, making violent threats and promises. According to Raffle, the exchange ended there. He stopped responding because the messages had become increasingly disturbing. Just a few days later, Lee was killed. Following the death of Lee, security analysts grappled with understanding how two individuals could plan and execute such an attack. The two men were later studied as a case of radicalization and violent extremism. Following Lee's death, there were concerns about a backlash against Muslim communities in the United Kingdom, with reports of increased tensions and vigilante activities. It also turned out that those who had killed Lee were part of a broader extremist network. The murder of Lee marked a significant attack by radicalized individuals in the United Kingdom. No narration.